Previously on the Originals, Lucien transformed into an enhanced version of the Originals and bit Finn. Since the venom was a mix of different toxins, even Klaus's blood couldn't cure him, and Finn ultimately lost his life. The first thing Lucien did after obtaining the mutated serum was to rescue the goddess he had pursued for 1,000 years. Under the romantic moonlight, he proudly recounted to Aurora his great feat of killing the Originals. He knelt on one knee before Aurora, inviting her to join the team that would ascend to a new level of mutation, but even in the face of such an enticing offer, Aurora did not accept Lucien's proposal. Instead, she asked him to first find a way to save her brother. Lucien, however, mistook this request as a subtle hint of her acceptance. Freya was drawing a magic circle in her book, studying a binding spell that could control Lucien, but Klaus, with his fiery temper, thought his sister was moving too slowly and decided to confront Lucien himself. The crowds were celebrating a music festival, but Klaus was more concerned about Camille's safety, only to find that she had enchanted her neighbor and become the owner of the house. Now, no vampire could enter her home. Camille had intended for her neighbor to invite Klaus in, but Klaus turned and left. Klaus soon found Lucien at a quiet street corner. However, Lucien's strength was beyond Klaus's expectations, and even with his hooked dagger, Klaus was quickly defeated. Camille heard the commotion as Klaus and Lucien fought. Lucien declared that he wouldn't kill Klaus just yet, but would instead use him, according to the Doomsday Prophecy, to deal with Elijah. Klaus watched helplessly as the hooked dagger plunged into his chest, while Camille, hidden in the shadows, was horrified. Camille rushed to warn the others, and the Originals strengthened their defenses. The house was transferred to Freya's name, making it impossible for uninvited vampires to enter. Freya invited Camille inside. Elijah soon received a text message from Lucien, demanding that he go alone to a bar, or else Klaus would die. At this moment, Lucien had already pulled the hooked dagger out of Klaus's body and restrained him with shackles. Aurora, watching the scene with great interest, remarked that once she drank the mutated blood, everything Klaus had done to her would be repaid tenfold. Lucien leaves in a hurry for his appointment, leaving Klaus with Aurora.
I wonder, when you decided to brick me into that dreadful tomb, did it ever occur to you that our roles might one day be reversed?
We both know that I buried you alive, because I could not bring myself to kill you.
Klaus claimed that he had always loved Aurora, and the reason he hadn't killed her was because he believed they still had a chance. But Aurora, who had been locked away in a wall, nearly rotting to death, was not easily swayed by Klaus's charms. Klaus couldn't believe that his allure had lost its power, so he intensified his efforts to brainwash her. But Aurora was clearly no longer fooled by Klaus's deceitful lies and even mercilessly mocked him in his desperate situation. Klaus asked, "So do you fully trust Lucien's confession of love?" Aurora, however, replied that she had only been using Lucien all along, never even considering the idea of loving him. As Klaus watched in despair, Aurora drank the blood serum. The bar that nullified all magic had become the only safe haven for Kol and Davina, where they didn't have to worry about Kol losing his mind at any moment. Vincent had also joined the effort to help Kol. He said he would first have a talk with the witch ancestors to see if he could find a breakthrough to remove Kol's curse. Kol didn't believe that Vincent was being so kind. Vincent, however, said he was only helping Davina and that it had nothing to do with Kol, but his communication with the witch ancestors ended in failure. Van appeared in front of Vincent, revealing that his mother was now among the witch ancestors, and he accused Vincent of being too close to the exiled Davina. Van suddenly unleashed a surge of power, knocking Vincent to the ground, and declared that the witch ancestors had stripped him of his regency. Now, Van was the new regent, and he would lead the witches in a war against the vampires according to the ancestors' will. Van then knocked Vincent unconscious. Kol and Davina were enjoying a sweet date when Kol's expression suddenly changed. This was a bar that could suppress all magic, but now the magic was gradually losing its effect. Kol had once again become a puppet for the witch ancestors, and his bloodthirsty desires were about to consume his sanity. In a critical moment, Marcel appeared from behind and snapped Kol's neck, then instructed Davina to quickly go help Vincent. He would take care of Kol and prevent him from turning the city into a bloodbath. Lucien and Elijah finally faced off. One demanded the other hand over his brother, while the other demanded Tristan. The tension was palpable, ready to erupt at any moment. Elijah pointed out that Lucien didn't actually care about Tristan's safety, since Tristan would only be an obstacle between him and Aurora. Lucien didn't hesitate to admit it, saying he was just asking to appease Aurora. Elijah retorted, "You went through all this trouble to transform yourself, just to become Aurora's errand boy?" Lucien was enraged. his eyes quickly turning red, and he stormed toward Elijah, but a magic circle appeared out of thin air, trapping Lucien. Freya had cast a spell to imprison Lucien, stating that the magic array would weaken his powers.
Maybe I can't kill you, but I can make you wish you were dead.
Camille and Haley also set their rescue plan into motion. However, Camille was still haunted by her fear of Aurora. Haley told Camille to either turn that fear into anger or do her best to ignore it. Camille noticed a pharmacy up ahead, and quickly came up with a plan to deal with Aurora. Aurora was mercilessly tormenting Klaus, and she picked up a wooden stake, preparing to end her life to achieve a new rebirth. But Camille appeared at the door. Klaus only wanted Camille to leave quickly, not wanting her to risk her life for him. Camille lured Aurora, coaxing her to step outside the door. Aurora didn't take Camille seriously at all, but Haley suddenly lunged out, tackling Aurora to the ground, quickly reaching for Aurora's heart. Klaus hurriedly stopped Haley, warning her that Aurora had already consumed the mutated serum. Reluctantly, Haley withdrew her hand, but Aurora seized the opportunity and with a single blow sent Haley flying. Now, with Camille alone, she quickly found herself at a disadvantage. Kol woke up from his unconscious state, and his thirst for blood overtook him once again. He grabbed the blood bag Marcel had given him and began drinking. Davina went to the witch's cemetery to rescue Vincent, only to stumble upon a mysterious magic circle. Just as Davina was about to touch the circle, Vincent shouted for her to stop. It was Van's spell against Kol. If all 6 candles were lit, Kol would fall under the witch's control. Davina proposed that she and Vincent join forces. Together, they worked to dismantle the magic circle. Meanwhile, Kol had already spiraled into madness. Marcel told him that he had to leave New Orleans immediately to escape the witch ancestors' control and ensure Davina's safety. Thanks to Davina and Vincent's efforts, all 6 candles were extinguished, and Kol returned to his senses. Kol realized that Marcel was right. He had to leave New Orleans. Trapped within the magical seal, Lucien struggled relentlessly and eventually managed to stand up. But before he could savor his victory, Freya struck him down again. A group of vampires surged forward, surrounding Lucien. Elijah then informed Lucien that Tristan was buried beneath 1,000 tons of cement, and that he would bury Lucien beneath a parking lot. But Lucien revealed that it was the witch ancestors who had granted him the power to fight the Originals, meaning that as long as he was within New Orleans, he could always receive magical assistance. And then Lucien walked out of the seal as if nothing had happened. The Originals' siblings were utterly shocked by this. A massacre was about to begin. Aurora also used the lives of Camille and Haley to threaten Klaus. Klaus set aside his usual arrogance and begged Aurora to spare them. Camille, however, deliberately provoked Aurora. Aurora slowly advanced toward Camille, saying she wasn't cut out to play the hero, then threw the dagger out of Camille's hand. For the first time, Klaus begged Aurora, but this only enraged her. She shoved Camille into the room. Camille soon began to feel unwell, blood slowly streaming from her eyes. Aurora continued to taunt her. In a fit of intense anger, Camille finally fought back, while Klaus watched nervously as she and Aurora battled. Camille once again found herself at a disadvantage, but Haley, who had regained consciousness, rushed in and knocked Aurora down. Klaus finally breathed a sigh of relief. Camille seized the opportunity to stab a sedative into Aurora's neck, but things didn't go so well for Elijah and his sister. Lucien quickly dealt with all the vampires. Freya tried to use her magic to pull Lucien's heart out of his chest, but her spells no longer had any effect on him. Elijah rushed over and knocked Lucien away, then quickly fled the scene with Freya. Lucien returned home in a rage, only to find that both Aurora and Klaus were gone. Instead, he saw footage of Aurora admitting that she had only been using him. Defeated both in love and battle, Lucien was consumed with rage. Kol, struggling to suppress his bloodthirsty urges, drove away from the New Orleans city limits. Kol's expression lightened as he left the ancestors' sphere of influence, but the ancestors were not willing to let Kol go so easily. Soon, the color began to drain from his hand. Kol was in agony, and he slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a sudden stop. The discomfort grew unbearable, and Kol was forced to return within the city limits, where the color returned to his skin, but his thirst for blood surged back stronger than ever. Filled with resentment, Lucien decided to target Camille. Camille, knowing Lucien couldn't enter her house, remained calm when he appeared, but Lucien had deduced that Camille must have transferred ownership of the house, and he correctly named her neighbor, stating that he had already killed the homeowner. Panicking, Camille rushed to shut the door, but it was too late. Lucien boldly stepped into Camille's room. She tried to fight back, but she was no match for him and was soon bitten on the arm. After a night of unconsciousness, Camille finally awoke, finding the bite on her arm horribly infected. Lucien, the one who started it all, was still there. Realizing she was dying, Camille frantically searched her bag for dark magic items. She grabbed a hex star and hurled it at Lucien, slashing his face with countless cuts, and then took the opportunity to flee. Camille made her way to Klaus's mansion. Klaus quickly noticed the wound on Camille's arm. Camille directly confessed her love for him and urged Klaus not to fall into the trap of seeking revenge on Lucien. Before collapsing into Klaus's arms from exhaustion, the Originals siblings gathered to discuss the solution to Camille's bite. Vincent arrived upon hearing the news. Klaus suggested that since Lucien had always viewed him as a role model, he might use his own blood as a cure, just as Klaus would. Camille mentioned that her apartment was filled with Lucien's blood. Vincent said he knew how to collect it all and quickly left. Meanwhile, Davina found Kol at the bar, furious at him for leaving without a word. Kol explained that the witch ancestors had cursed him, and he couldn't even leave New Orleans freely. Davina promised she would find a way to save him. Davina soon received a call from Marcel. After learning about Camille's bite, Davina hung up and angrily declared that she would go straight to Lucien to settle the score. Kol disagreed with his girlfriend taking such a risk, but Davina insisted that she had a way to make Lucien talk. And, ignoring Kol's pleas, she stubbornly left. Davina poured an entire jar of salt at the entrance of the bar. Inside the bar were gathered the enemies of the Originals family to find a cure for Camille. Davina had come to the bar alone, with just a casual wave of her hand. The partying crowd instantly stopped and turned their eyes on her. Lucien quickly realized that her arrival was not a friendly one. Davina waved her hand again, and all the vampires at the party collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Lucien's face darkened with menace as he charged toward Davina, only to be stopped by a barrier spell. Davina pulled out a voodoo doll, explaining that it would ensure Lucien spoke only the truth. She pointed the doll at Lucien, demanding to know how to cure Camille's bite. Backed by the power of the witch ancestors, Lucien was unfazed. Instead, he revealed that the witch ancestors had plans to deal with Davina. Lucien boldly crossed the barrier spell, saying that his venom had no cure and that he had meticulously prepared to ensure there were no loopholes in the magic. But what shocked Davina was that Lucien didn't harm her, because the ancestors had other plans for her and suggested she ask Kol about them. Davina returned to the bar. Kol had already drained all the blood bags. The witch ancestors had played a cruel joke on the young couple. They had planted a curse on Kol, compelling him to kill his own lover with his own hands. The more Kol tried to suppress this desire, the worse his condition became. For the sake of his girlfriend's safety, Kol made a difficult decision. He pulled out the dagger that had once sealed him and begged Davina to use it on him again. Seeing the man she had resurrected with her own hands forced back into slumber, Davina was heartbroken. She promised she would find a way to break the curse. Kol also assured her that this was the best way to keep her safe. They shared a passionate kiss. Davina slowly drove the dagger into her lover's heart. Kol collapsed at Davina's feet, his body gradually losing its color. Under the bright sunlight, sitting together with the one you love, sipping coffee, discussing art, weather, and life, and in an unguarded moment, exchanging a smile. Street performers sing nearby, passers-by hurry along, but only those in love pause and linger for each other. However, all this beauty was nothing more than an illusion, a dream Klaus created for his lover, solely to ease Camille's suffering. In contrast to Finn's swift death, Camille's journey ended in a way that was both beautiful and romantic. Freya used potions to slow the spread of the venom. Klaus tirelessly acted as Camille's personal nurse. They shared their deepest thoughts over wine. Camille suggested drafting a will, saying that after all the time she had taken notes for Klaus, it was now his turn to help her. Thoughtfully, she considered every friend around her, preparing gifts for each of them. She mischievously joked about leaving an old board game from under her bed to Elijah, but when she mentioned the keepsake she intended to leave for Klaus, he couldn't hold back anymore. He refused to accept the reality, insisting that they would find a way to save her. Vincent took a risk by returning to Camille's apartment to collect Lucien's blood in a last-ditch effort to save her life. Marcel reminded Vincent not to be consumed by grief. As the spell continues to work, the blood scattered on the floor rises into the air and slowly falls into the white container. But Vincent's spell was quickly interrupted, as the witch ancestors forcibly halted his magic. Meanwhile, Haley and Elijah drove into the woods, hoping to bring hope back from the werewolves, believing that her abilities might heal the bite. However, after drinking Lucien's blood, Camille showed no signs of improvement. Instead, she fell into a deep coma. Klaus was left with no choice but to connect their minds, creating some beautiful memories for Camille's brief life. In the dream, they walked hand in hand under the bright sunlight, immersing themselves in the ordinary, mundane world, savoring a happiness that didn't exist. Even in her final moments, Camille didn't forget to redeem Klaus, reminding him that there were still many people around him who loved him.
Why are you telling me this?
Because love will make you strong. It will make you the man that I know you want to be. But you're gonna have to remember that. Because I won't be here to remind you.
Klaus was overwhelmed with grief. It was only when Camille held his hand to comfort him that he managed to pull himself together. Freya, with a heavy heart, admitted that she had tried everything she could, but it was all in vain. Camille's death was now inevitable. As night fell, Camille's life gradually reached its end, and her condition had deteriorated to its worst. Vincent suggested placing Camille's soul into a necklace. Freya, however, pointed out that the necklace could only be used by members of the Michelson family, but she did consider the possibility of letting Camille be reborn in someone else's body. Elijah, however, insisted that Camille would never do anything that would harm another person. In the dream, Klaus took Camille to the place where they first met. They reminisced about their first encounter through music and art. Suddenly, Camille collapsed into Klaus's arms, exhausted.
I feel like I've always known you. Been in your mind. Maybe that's just how you know you love someone.
I do love you, you know.
One by one, the people around them disappeared, and with tears in her eyes, Camille admitted that while she wished she could face death with courage, she couldn't do it. Klaus did his best to comfort his beloved. They sat together by the fountain. Camille fainted in Klaus's arms, and Klaus, struggling to hold back his grief, whispered lovingly in her ear. Camille's face gradually turned ashen, and Klaus, feeling helpless, gripped her hand tightly. Friends came one by one to say their goodbyes to Camille. Vincent said he would fight for her, even if he failed. He believed Camille would be waiting for him on the other side. Haley promised to tell her daughter about Camille, ensuring that Hope would remember the aunt who selflessly helped her father. Klaus remained silent, holding back his sorrow, while Elijah could only pat him on the shoulder in consolation. Freya and Vincent channeled their grief into determination, resolving to find a way through magic to destroy Lucien. Davina, devastated by the loss of her friend, returned to the bar, hoping that her boyfriend's cold body might offer some comfort. An unusual evening wind suddenly picked up, and the city trembled, causing widespread fear. Davina, also perplexed, looked around to understand what was happening, but when she turned back, she realized Kol's body had vanished. Kol, now unconscious and ferocious, stood before Davina, and without hesitation, sank his teeth into her neck. Davina struggled helplessly, but Kol ignored her pleas. In the end, Kol could not escape the cruel twist of fate, and he ended up killing his own lover with his own hands.